Right now, the building hums like it's thinking about you. The clock blinks a thin, tired light, and the hallway air smells like cold metal and coffee that went bitter an hour ago. Tonight is about the hours most people don't keep, where a badge swipe sounds too loud and an empty chair looks recently used. Night shift truths. No jump scares you can outrun, just the kind that sit beside you and breathe. 3 stops, a hospital corridor where the motion sensor trips in a sterilized room, a 24/7 diner where the walk-in's light ticks like a metronome while the receipt printer forgets the time, and a warehouse CCTV console where camera 12 shows an angle the building doesn't have. Well, keep it calm, steady, like a flashlight you don't shake because you're not sure what's waiting when it comes back on. Every detail comes from someone who swore they weren't alone. If you're listening on your own shift, tell me the hour glowing on your clock or what machine's keeping you company. Quiet replies, welcome. Settle in, zip the jacket, check the exits. When the hum turns to static, don't turn around, just follow the story. The hospital at 3:07 a.m. sounded like a refrigerator thinking. Fluorescent tubes hummed in long ribs down the corridor, each ballast a soft insect. The night security tech walked with the key ring's weight, tapping his thigh. His badge brushed the lanyard clip and made a small, regular click. The nurse's station sat hollow, monitors asleep, but breathing faint status lights. He liked the routine. Badge swipe, door chirp, note the auto door hiss as it resealed. The building automation panel reported all greens, a tidy lit grid. Generator thrum stayed low, like a calm throat. The incident log held only a coffee spill and a parking lot argument at midnight. He told himself he preferred a quiet board. Surgical had been sterilized at 21 how? The smell still gripped the air, bleach and cold metal, skin of the tongue gone numb. Mop bucket wheels had left pale crescents that dried into nothing. A linen cart sat squared to the wall, its plastic shroud tucked like a hospital corner. The motion sensors along the ceiling blinked their patient heartbeats. He checked CCTV from the small desk tucked by the stairwell. Camera 9 watched the freight elevator. Camera 11 the waiting area with the brochures no one took after dark. Camera 6 covered the OR hall, a clean perspective, down-polished floor. Every feed showed what it should, colours flattened by fluorescent honesty. He let his eyes rise and fall with the frames the way you watch Tide. The freight elevator dinged once without opening. That wasn't a crime. Metal contracts, wires settle, the building sighs. Still it sketched a tiny pencil mark across his attention. He wrote the time in the log and underlined nothing. The pen rasped too loudly on paper in the empty wing. A badge reader down hall woke and flashed as if someone swiped. He looked up in time to see the indicator fade back to red. The computer blinked a small notification the automation always used. Zone or hall motion. He frowned without meaning to. Cleaning crew had clocked out at 22:12, 3 signatures and a thumbs up. He stood, the chair's plastic legs whispering against tile. The corridor carried sound strangely at night, spreading each step and feeding it back thin. He passed the break room, the coffee pot glass ringed brown, the microwave clock blinking 12 feet like a nervous tick. He passed a wall map with fire exits marked in bright decals. Everything useful felt far away. Outside OR 3, the air turned sharper, almost freezer tight. The occupancy counter above the door held a polite red 0. He touched the handle, suction tugged as if the room held a held breath. The motion sensor's tiny click arrived late, like someone deciding after you knock. He felt the building pay attention. He swiped his badge and got a quick green, but the lock didn't fully yield. He swiped again, slower, and the bolt clacked with a small apology. The seal eased, the door shoulder-heavy, a sound like wet glass peeling from wet glass. Light through the narrow window looked correct, steady, bright, clinical. He put one boot over the threshold. Behind him, camera 6's feed on the desk flickered and recovered. Lights don't flicker in ORs. He knew that like knowing the path from bed to bathroom in the dark. He steadied, hand on the door, pulse, baseline. Somewhere below, the generator deepened, then leveled, a baritone clearing its throat. He looked up at the counter one more time. He stood with his palm on the doorframe, watching the red digits hold at 1 like a dare. Occupancy counters were dumb devices, infrared, heat signatures, simple math. They misread warm carts sometimes, or a door left cracked. He told himself that and stepped fully into OR3. The seal settled behind him with a soft, sticky kiss. The room looked as it should, stainless everywhere, edges true, surfaces wiped until they forgot fingerprints. Drapes were wrapped, instrument trays zipped under blue plastic like presents. The overhead booms slept with their joints tucked in, lights off, but ready. It smelled like bleach and cold metal, the air drier than the hall. His breath didn't fog, but it felt like it wanted to. He took a slow loop, keeping elbows in so he wouldn't brush anything. The surgical table sat dead center, pad clean, straps coiled neat like sleeping snakes. The anesthesia machine was dark, hoses coiled, a green cap on the oxygen port snug. A rolling stool faced the wrong way, toward a blank wall instead of the table. He pictured housekeeping bumping it and moved on. A stainless bowl on a stand pinged once, a thin cooling sound that didn't belong in a cold room. He stopped and listened to the quiet settle again. The wall clock second hand swept smooth without ticks, steady as a heartbeat. Above the scrub sink window, a motion sensor winked its tiny LED like it understood something he didn't. He felt the skin between his shoulder blades wake up. He waved a hand under the ceiling sensor just to see the little eye notice him. The digits outside the door should have recalculated. Someone in, 0 out, still 1. He backed half a step into the threshold and watched the counter through the window. 1 held, patient as a lifeguard's whistle in the pocket. He stepped back in and closed the door to listen to the room breathe. He keyed his radio low. "Main, surgical 3 shows occupied. I'm doing a walkthrough." The reply cracked and smeared like wet ink, somewhere between static and a voice saying copy. He tried again and got only the walkie's patient carrier hiss. The building made plenty of noises on its own. Radios shouldn't join in. The break room down the hall thunked once, a soft cabinet settling. He waited in case footsteps followed, but the hall stayed flat. In the OR, the air was cooler near the floor, warm at his chest, like 2 rooms layered wrong. A faint, sweet note rode the disinfectant. Latex, maybe, or the memory of it. He rolled the stool back under the counter without meaning to. He checked tiny things because tiny things told the truth. The glove box had 1 cuff poking out like a tongue, though cleaning staff left them flush. The sharp container lid sat turned a few degrees off its marked lock arrow. The whiteboard was wiped, but in the erased haze he could read ghost letters of start at 07:30, a schedule from another day. His name in the corner, printed hours ago when he signed the post-sterile checklist, looked thinner than he remembered. He was done pretending the counter didn't bother him. He pulled the door again to the first catch, so he could see the digits while still hearing the room. The hallway's hum slid in like a low tide. He thought about propping the door, then didn't. Protocols lived for moments like that. He took 1 step back inside, just far enough that the seal kissed his boot. He watched the flow meter ball hover, a bead of glass holding its nerve. The valve was off. He could see the handle lined up with the red mark. He tapped the gauge with a knuckle the way old Tex taught, expecting the ball to settle. It didn't. The whisper in the line stayed the size of a patient sigh. He pulled the green cap from the oxygen port and reseated it, firm, deliberate. The whisper stopped like a thought that realized it was being listened to. He stood very still and let the room become itself again. The fluorescent ribs hummed, steady, apologetic. The occupancy counter through the narrow window kept its patient 1. Back at the wall, he pressed the anesthesia machine's power just to confirm it stayed dark. The screen stayed dead. No boot logo, no fan surge. He was glad for the silence and then noticed how his heart had filled it. A laminated tag on the vent hose flicked once as if in a draft. There wasn't a draft. Through the glass, he could see the desk where Camera 6's monitor sat, a little island of glow in the hall. A ghost reflection of himself lifted in the window, faint and layered over the corridor's lines. For a second version of his reflection didn't move with him, delay or trick of light. He stepped, and the other him completed the step half a beat later. The feeling landed like stepping on a stair that wasn't there. He told the room what he was about to do, because talking anchored things. "I'm going to check the counter." His voice came back thin, as if the ceiling baffles filtered it, and forgot to return parts of it. He opened the door to the first catch, and leaned out enough to catch the digit square. They blinked once, as if adjusting brightness, then held at 1 with calm stubbornness. He walked 3 doors down to OR5 and pressed his badge for a comparison read. The reader chirped happy, and the occupancy above it showed 0 like a closed eye. He didn't go in. He wrote a note in the log by the desk about sensor calibration in surgical, and left a line open for a follow-up time. His handwriting looked like someone writing in a moving car. Back at OR3, the door had eased itself fully closed. The seal held the last inch with that wet glass sound, as if it had exhaled while he was away. He watched the counter over the frame. 1 stayed true. He stood there a few seconds longer than he meant to, like listening at a stranger's door. Inside again, the air carried a new note that didn't belong to chemicals or metal. Damp cloth, maybe, or wool left to dry. He followed it to the linen cart and lifted the plastic shroud just enough to see stacks, counted, folded, crisp. The smell was not there. He let the cover drop and the smell returned behind him, farther into the room. He turned and saw it. On the surgical table pad, a shallow impression, the shape of weight having rested a moment and then changed its mind. Not a full outline, nothing dramatic, just a slump in the foam that took a second longer to lift than it should have. He placed his palm there. The material remembered him quickly, almost grateful. He wiped that thought away and checked his watch he already knew the time on. From the ceiling, speaker used for staff pages, a tiny artifact of sound uncurled, thinner than a whisper. Not a word, more like the tail of one, an ing without its beginning. He watched the metal bowl on its stand, the stool, the hoses coiled like quiet cursive. The speaker ticked once, same as a cooling wire. Somewhere between that and silence, the room seemed to hold its breath back from him. He backed out to the desk to check camera 6, telling himself it was just to be sure the lens hadn't smudged. The feed showed OR3 from its usual high corner, a clean, clinical angle with nowhere to hide. The timestamp burned steady in the corner, matching the hallway clock to the minute. He watched himself enter a moment ago and stand near the table, hand on the pad, like he was thinking of something he couldn't name. Then the image hiccuped, a single dropped frame, and returned as if nothing had happened. He scrubbed the rewind wheel back 15 seconds. The door in the video eased shut on its seal with that same wet glass glide he knew too well. In the reflection on the window, the corridor lights banded across the glass in neat rows. For 3 frames, the banding doubled like a ghosting effect, then snapped back. No alarms fired, no overlays flashed, only that shiver of picture that meant either a cable was loose or something else had brushed the system. He flipped to camera 11 for the hall view and held both feeds side by side. In the live hall, the little desk lamp and his incident log sat exactly as they were. On camera 11, the lamp halo looked the same, but the page of the log wasn't where he'd left it. It sat 1 line farther down. He looked at the real log and at the feed again until the 2 images agreed, like they'd been dared to. The building automation panel chimed a benign notice. Surgical WOR3 door secure. He hadn't touched the door in the last minute, but systems chatted like that overnight, like neighbors telling each other the weather. He scrolled the event list anyway and found a pair of messages stamped within the same second. Motion, or hall, motion, or 3. The font looked identical to every other entry, which somehow made it worse. The freight elevator answered a call with a low groan, the kind that came from deep down where gears thought about obeying. He watched its floor indicator on camera 9 tick from B to 1, without the usual rattle of a pallet jack or linen cart. No one called in from materials, no one had a key scheduled. The cab arrived and sat with its doors closed like it had changed its mind. He radioed again, quieter. "Main, surgical, radio check." The carrier held a breath, then a thin voice made it through that could have been his co-worker or could have been the idea of a co-worker. "Pie." He didn't ask it to repeat. He set the radio down like setting down a glass you don't want to admit is empty. Back at OR3, he did the things the handbook would have suggested, even if no one was looking. He opened the door to the first catch and made a clear call-out, naming the room and the hour, saying he was entering. He waited the 3 beats for anyone to answer, which was really for himself. Inside, the air met him with that freezer-tight calm that made his teeth feel too large for his mouth. He swung his light low across the floor, just to change the angles that everything knew. Stainless kicked the beam back in little moons, and the edges of sealed packs made neat shadows. By the scrub sink, a faucet sensor woke for half a second and pushed out a single rope of water as if the room had cleared its throat. The rope broke, and the drain swallowed the sound like it hadn't been there. On the counter, a glove box breathed 1 glove farther out when he walked by. Static on latex, he told himself, the way plastic clings to a sleeve. The glove's rolled cuff settled with the faintest tack sound. He passed the anesthesia machine again and kept his eyes on the power light that wasn't on. His mind kept wanting to give it a glow it did not have. He angled back to the door so he could see the counter above it and the corridor beyond at the same time. The red digits waited, calm as a lifeguard who never gets wet. He stood half in the room and half out, the seal touching his thigh, the hallway hum thin at his back. He took 1 more step across the threshold, a small, ordinary shift of weight that shouldn't change anything at all. The digits rolled from 1 to 2 and stayed there. He let the 2 sit there and tried to treat it like a typo. He edged 1 foot back so the seal brushed his shin and leaned into the hall, counting out loud like a tech doing a calibration. No change. He stepped fully into the corridor, let the door rest on its first catch, waited and checked again. 2 held, polite and wrong at the same time. He tried the simple game sensors, understand, in and out, slow and obvious, shoulders squared so the beam could see him. The digits blinked once like a person thinking, then settled back to 2 with the confidence of a scoreboard. He considered propping the door and decided against it. Sterile rooms have long memories. He pictured the write-up. Security tech introduces wedge to post-sterile OR. He kept his boot off the threshold and his hands clean. At the desk, he pulled up camera 6 so he could watch himself be the control and the experiment. The feed showed the door on its first catch, his own shoulder just in frame, a ghost of him moving slower than he felt in his bones. He tapped the audio icon for the room intercom and said his name, the time, and that he was clearing a false occupancy. Half a second later, his own voice came back thin, and in that echo a word slid on that he hadn't said. Still, like a quiet correction that wasn't his. The building panel chimed again. Surgical OR3, door secure, motion, or prep, motion cleared. He hadn't touched prep. The freight elevator returned to B all on its own, and no one signed the manifest. These were things that could be explained on paper with nice words like thermal drift and electrical noise. Paper couldn't explain why his jaw had started to ache like he'd been clenching. He went back to the door and opened it the rest of the way, stepping in with a deliberate calm he hoped would rub off on the room. The air wrapped him again, cool at the shins, dry at the tongue. The strap on the surgical table made a small slide sound and laid itself gently against the pad, as if it had remembered gravity late. He lifted the strap and let it fall. It landed without drama. The oxygen flow meter ball trembled like a held breath, trying not to be rude. Clearing ore 3, he said, because procedure was a handrail. He named the corners as he looked at them: sink, cabinet, booms, table, cart, so there would be no dark spots in his head later. The glove cuff poking from the box had crept another inch, like it wanted a hand. He pressed it back with 2 knuckles, and it stuck to the cardboard with the tiniest tack, and then let go. The room gave him back nothing for a full 10 seconds that stretched. He closed the door gently until the seal kissed and held, deciding he'd rather have one variable than the whole hallway's climate arguing with him. The sound system ticked, then threw a single syllable into the air, like a coin. Just the tail again, ing, probably from an old page that got stuck in a buffer somewhere. He turned to the stainless bowl when it pinged like cooling metal, forgetting it should already be as cold as the room. The ping didn't repeat. Something rubber on the floor under the anesthesia machine made a faint stretch sound and then forgave itself. He tried the light controls by the wall, not to kill the room, just to dim the ambient band he knew didn't affect sterile lighting. The switch responded with a polite click, and nothing changed. ORs play by their own rules. He stood under the boom and touched the handle sleeve, feeling the ridged plastic without moving the head. The boom drifted a fraction anyway, the way a door decides to close if the house is a degree off level. Its motion stopped exactly where it would have been useful if someone were working. He checked the counter through the narrow window more out of habit than hope. 2, steady as a lifeguard. He took one more step in, not even a step really, just a shift deeper, so he could see the far cabinet without craning. The seal pulled the door the rest of the way without help, and the latch eased itself down with a soft mechanical courtesy. He didn't move, and the digits outside rolled to 3 and stayed there. He stood under the counter and let 3 burn into him until it felt almost reasonable. The numbers weren't trying to scare him, they were telling him a story in a language he didn't want to learn. He'd done the easy tests, played nice with the sensors, waited for the room to be polite back. It wasn't. He decided to stop waiting for permission. At the desk he left himself breadcrumbs, pen laid diagonally across the log, lamp angled a notch to the left, radio clipped high on his shoulder instead of pocketed. He said his name and the time out loud once for the camera, steady as if he had an audience. He pressed his badge to OR3 and opened the door all the way like walking into a pool. The seal kissed shut behind him with that soft, glassy sound and stayed shut. Inside, he walked to the wall panel and toggled room not in use to in use, then back again, a little ritual to see if anything admitted it was paying attention. The panel gave him its neat beep. From the ceiling speaker came a second, thinner copy of that beep, half a heartbeat late, like the room practicing him. The occupancy digits outside the door, he couldn't see them now, should not have cared about any of this. He cared anyway. He eyed the back door that led to the sub-sterile core, the service corridor where autoclaves opened on their other mouths. That door stayed locked in hours like these, pressure held, air managed, all the right rules. He knew he didn't have to open it to clear a room. He also knew the counter was counting something. He slid his key in and turned until the bolt sounded like a throat being cleared. The core air came cool and steamed, a memory of heat more than heat itself. Dark until the motion sensor woke a strip of ceiling light that turned the metal long and pale. Autoclave doors sat huge and patient, their glass like the eyes of a sleeping animal. A linen cart stood with its shroud loose at one corner, like someone had just left it. The corridor swallowed his footfalls and returned them as paper. He stayed just inside the threshold, door a handspan open so pressure didn't shove it closed. The autoclave nearest him wore a necklace of condensation around the inside of its porthole glass. He watched one bead break and answer gravity with an easy slide, leaving a skated path like a finger had just drawn it. The clipboard on the wall held a cycle sheet that ended hours ago in tidy initials, not his. Somewhere far below, the freight elevator decided again that it was important, and then changed its mind. He stepped fully into the core because stopping halfway was worse. The light at the far end warmed up late and threw a narrow shadow past his boots. He checked behind the linen cart because that was what you did to stop your head from making things. Only floor and wheels and a forgotten twist tie. The quiet back here had a stitched quality, like panels laced together. He rekeyed the sub-sterile door into OR3 and let the room reintroduce itself. Everything was where he had left it, and a little where he hadn't. The glove cuff showed a new inch of its rolled mouth, as if listening. The strap on the table lay over the pad now instead of coiled at the edge, gentle and ready like someone had draped it with a free hand while thinking. He felt his face do the careful expression you use on a skittish dog. He crossed to the front door to get sight of the counter, not rushing, just letting his steps be honest. Through the narrow window, the red digits sat up straight. The number had found a new shape. 4 held there like a chair pulled out at an empty table. He let the sight land, then kept walking as if he could move through the fact. He took the overhead light handle in his palm and angled the lamp to carve shadows where shadows might admit things. The beam made clean circles on steel and plastic, and the seam of the table pad where a shallow impression had been. In the bright, the air above the pad carried a slow swirl like breath without a body, not fog, not dust, just a patient turning. He said the room's name and his own again so the record would have something human in it. The speaker answered with the tail of a word, not ing this time, but stand, as if the first half had been kept. He stood very still inside the tight white circle the overhead had chosen, the rest of the room falling to peripheral grey. Stainless answered with small moons, and the table pad looked a shade darker, like it remembered weight too recent to talk about. He eased one palm onto the pad and felt the foam's slow rise push back, polite and late. Behind him, something weightless considered the inches where a shoulder would stand. He let his hand stay because moving first felt like losing. From the ceiling speaker, the tails of sound began stitching themselves together. A breath. Another breath. Stand! It wasn't the page system. He knew that cadence like he knew his badge number. The radio on his shoulder clicked carrier with no voice, like a throat trying and failing. He said his name and surgical 3 because names make rooms behave. The oxygen flow meter ball drifted up to 2.5, then settled at an honest 2, as if it had thought better of showing off. The reservoir bag on the anesthesia machine gave one neat inhale and fell again, a movement without a machine to explain it. The screen stayed dead, no boot tones, no status bars, just its calm blank. He set his palm on the faceplate to feel the silence with skin. It felt room cold, which somehow counted as an answer. On camera, 6 beyond the glass, his shoulders made a clean shape in the corner of the frame. For a beat, a second shoulder rose beside his at a slightly wrong angle, as if someone his height was standing there, but looking a degree off the world the rest of them agreed on. The view hiccuped and returned to honest geometry, ceilings, corners, nothing extra. He stared at the live hall and the recorded hall until they matched out of stubbornness. He did not wave. The sub-sterile door gave a tiny sympathetic buzz under his fingertips, pressure doing what weather does. In the round glass, the autoclave's inner window filmed over again, patient and even. 5 pale arcs cleared in the fog in a row, then paused, like knuckles reconsidering a knock. Water beads slid down in tidy paths, leaving whiter tracks. He pretended he hadn't seen it because pretending sometimes held. At the whiteboard, fresh wetness laced through the eraser haze with a practiced steadiness. His name appeared where a roll should be, and then, in light strokes under it, a time that wasn't now. He wiped with his sleeve and the ghost stayed, like writing pressed from the other side. "Not funny," he said to a room that did not claim to joke. The damp wool smell moved a step closer. The table strap slid with a sound like someone moving a belt politely. It found the back of his wrist without hurry and settled there, not tight, just present, the way a dog noses into your palm and waits. He lifted his hand and the strap came with it, then let him go as if reminded he wasn't who it needed. The buckle touched the pad and made a small, decisive click all by itself. He told himself, gravity talks, a clean chirp, cut through the speaker, too crisp to be a failure. "Stay with," it said, and clicked closed before it could choose an end. "I'm not your anything," he heard himself answer, and didn't recognize his own voice. The pad deepened by a finger's width, the kind of change you'd see if someone exhaled and settled in. A second glove eased from the box and fell, fingers pointing toward where that shoulder in the circle would be. He turned for the front door and pressed his badge because leaving had become a plan he needed to prove he still owned. The reader flashed a quick green that washed to red as if a hand had been laid over it from the other side. The latch gave him the first 1/4 inch, then stuck like a mouth keeping a secret. He leaned to the narrow window and looked up at the frame. Outside, the counter slid to 6 and held. He kept his hand on the latch, like it might learn from him. The reader cycled green to red again, polite, stubborn. The strap on the table rested where it had fallen, buckle quiet, as if it had finished saying what it needed to. He breathed once and counted the breath like a step. The damp wool smell felt closer than air. He set his pen on the counter at a diagonal and angled the lamp a notch, breadcrumbs he trusted more than courage. "Clearing or 3, he said for the record, though it sounded like he was talking to a wall that could remember. The ceiling speaker didn't answer. It merely stayed open a fraction, the way a door stays a fraction open when you're not sure yet. He turned the handle again, and the latch gave him the first inch, like a favor. Beyond the window, the red digits considered and didn't move. He tried the sub-sterile door instead. Key in, shoulder square, pressure equalized the way the manual liked. The bolt came easy, too easy, like someone had already done it from the far side. In the round autoclave glass, fog drew its slow film and cleared itself in tidy paths. The linen cart's cover lifted and settled as if someone passing had brushed it with a coat. He stood between the two doors like a person choosing which weather to accept. "Stay," the speaker said again, whole this time, thin as tracing paper. He answered without deciding to. "I can't." The reservoir bag rose and fell once, polite as a nod. The oxygen ball trembled and settled back on too, practicing patience. He pressed his badge and pulled, not hard, just honest. This time the latch returned, slow but clean, as if something had stepped aside an inch. He didn't look at the counter. He counted his steps into the hall and let the seal finish its wet glass kiss behind him. The corridor's hum came back like an apology. Two nurses' monitors blinked their distant status lights as if nothing had been discussed. At the desk he checked camera 6 because he had to see what the room believed. All 3 lay under its white circle, stainless, making moons of itself. The table strap was where he'd left it, the buckle still, the pad smooth. Nothing theatrical, nothing wrong in the kind that makes reports. He exhaled and felt his jaw ache with the letting go. On the feed, the door remained closed, obedient. He wrote in the log, "Surgical OR3, false occupancy, cleared." The pen made ordinary scratching sounds that didn't try to be anything else. He reached to set the lamp back to its normal angle and paused. On camera, his pen hadn't yet touched the paper. His hand hovered a second in the past, as if the room were watching him catch up. He glanced up at the counter, out of habit. The red digits sat at 1, a number with room in it. He told himself it was counting the room's own heat, a trick of air over the sensor, stale breath in a sealed space. He put the radio back on his shoulder where it lived, felt the weight settle like a small agreement. He didn't go back to check. On camera 6, a single glove that hadn't been there a moment ago lay on the pad with its fingers slightly curled, palm where a wrist would rest if someone had reached up to take a hand. The counter above the door held at 1, patient as a lifeguard's whistle in a pocket. He turned the lamp straight, set the pen precisely parallel to the log, and listened to the building hum like a person who had decided. The door to OR3 stayed shut, and inside the white circle, the reservoir bag rose once, slow and neat, like a chest remembering. The diner held the night like a bowl, steam, coffee, fryer oil, and the soft buzz of neon that made everything a little flatter. At 2:58 a.m. the radio behind the counter played a station that sounded half underwater. The chrome trim caught the fluorescence in thin white stripes, and the pie case turned slowly, like it forgot why it was still awake. Out past the windows, sodium lights made the parking lot look the same size no matter where you stood. Inside, the clock over the grill took its time and no one argued. Ray Morales worked the graveyard line because it fit the way her head counted hours. She liked the ritual, scrape the grill, filter the oil, check the walk-in, wipe the pass until the heat lamps showed her own hands back. She kept the ticket printer loaded and crooked the roll's tail just so, a habit she could spot on camera later. The night manager, Kenny, lived at the register with a stack of ones and an old calculator. Dina floated the floor with a coffee pot like it was a small lantern. Customers were the kind the night always found. 2 truckers with shoulders like furniture, a nurse hunched over a to-go menu, a kid at the corner booth charging his phone and not looking up. The truckers ordered breakfasts no one should eat after midnight, and then did, content. The nurse wanted eggs and toast and quiet. The kid wanted the outlet more than the pancakes he kept refilling with syrup. Everyone kept their voices low because the room asked them to. The walk-in sat at the end of the back hall, door painted a confident white, latch big enough to hold a promise. Ray trusted its sounds. The fans even were, the lift and settle of the compressor, the tiny tunk the light made when the door switch gave in. She checked temp twice a night with the clipboard pen because handwriting made it real. The rubber floor inside squeaked under sneakers like it had a memory of rain. Little wrong things had started to stack in paper-thin layers. Twice tonight the ticket printer had spooled a blank slip with only the timestamp, as if the register had remembered an order no one had placed. The salad prep fridge thumped once with the compressor off, a sound without a machine behind it. The radio cut for a breath between songs and gave back the heavy room to itself. Ray noted each thing because noticing was how you got through. She did the sweep, mop bucket wheels soft on tile, sanitizer bucket sloshing a clean line along baseboards. The mop head came away from under the prep table colder than it had any right to be. At the back door, she cracked the metal bar to vent cooking heat and let dock air roll in. Diesel, wet cardboard, night fog. Somewhere out there a delivery truck idled, then thought better of it. Kenny called door, Ray, in the tone of the handbook, and she let it settle. By the office, the little 4-camera monitor showed everything the place believed about itself. Front counter, booths, back hall, and a slice of the grill line. Camera 3 stared down the hall past the walk-in, a fixed angle on latches and scuffed paint, and the exit signs patient green. Ray liked glancing up to see herself crossing in miniature. It made the work look easy from far away. The walk-in's light began its old habit, clicking faintly like a metronome when the door shut, a tick, pause tick that belonged to warm hinges cooling. Only it kept going tonight, long after metal should have made up its mind. She stood outside the door to hear it argue with itself. The fan smoothed over the ticks until her ear learned to hear both at once. Inside, a bottle shifted against another and gave a polite glass note. She pulled the latch and stepped into the cold, breath turning thin and private. Shelves sat in their tidy rows, eggs, milk, prepped pans wrapped tight, a tray of pies they'd never sell. Condensation made a soft lace around the light fixture, beading where the warm air had stowed away. The thermometer needle sat on a steady 4 degrees Celsius and pretended it always had. When she shut the door, the little switch clicked once more than it should. Back on the line, the ticket printer chirped and spit a short strip without anyone touching the register. Ray tore it free and flipped it, expecting blank or a jam's gibberish. The time read 0307, clean as a stamped coin. Under it, where table numbers lived, the printer had chosen a seat that didn't exist and never had. Seat 0. Ray held the slip up to Kenny like a weird bug she wasn't going to keep. He squinted without touching it and made that noise night managers make when they don't want to buy your problem. Printer burp, he said. Thermal paper gets moody. She pinned the strip under the magnet by the expo window anyway. Paper kept score better than memory. To prove it to herself, she keyed a test. 1 coffee, 1 BLT, booth 4. The printer chirped obedient and gave her a normal ticket with all the right lines, table, seat, timestamp that matched the wall clock. She ran a thumb across the black text and felt the heat still in it. No static, no smear. She slid it into the spike and told the register, "Thank you," because sometimes you had to be polite to machines. Back in the hall, the walk-in light ticked its tiny metronome, patient like someone learning to breathe through a straw. Ray pushed the door just enough to trip the switch, listening for the click that should end the rhythm. It stopped, then stuttered a single tick after the silence as if it had one more thought. Condensation curled on the fixture's rim and wrote little commas before falling. She put a clean bar towel around the switch and thumbed it twice, ritual and repair At once. On the line, she moved eggs and potatoes the way a night cook does when the room is more air than people. The truckers got their plates and a second coffee they didn't need. Dina slid a fresh pot across the room without saying anything loud. The kid in the corner lifted his phone, checked the screen, and went back to pretending the pancakes were doing something. Ray caught herself counting the grill's pops against the tick in the hall. The office monitor watched like a bored lifeguard. Camera 3 held the back corridor in its narrow truth. Walk-in door, scuffed paint, exit sign, that endless mat everyone trips on. For a breath, the screen bloomed brighter, the way cheap CCDs do when a transformer somewhere yawns. The green of the exit sign poured a little neon onto the door's white skin, then settled. The time burned steady in the corner, same as the clock, honest as a stamp. The printer chirped again without hands, a neat, well-timed sound that should have meant money. Ray glanced up at the register and saw no keys lit, no human anywhere near it. She reached the expo window and took the strip like a message. Stro 307 again, black and shore, with seat 0 where a seat shouldn't be. Under items, nothing but a thin dash, like a line left for someone else to fill. She waited for the part where she laughed at herself, and it didn't come. Fryers went still between orders, and the oil settled into a glassy quiet. She could hear the radio in the break room through the office door, some soft ad about mattresses that sounded like a lullaby. The tick in the hall kept patient time, as if it had found the beat the diner hid under. She realized her jaw had started to ache. Ray gave herself the small mercy of checking the walk-in again, because the body likes to see the place that's making the noise. The door hinge sighed the way hinges are paid to, and cold wrapped her wrists. Inside was ordinary, labels forward, dates neat, the thermometer's needle parked. The light inside didn't tick when she was in there. It shone like any light should. When she stepped out and let the door seal, the metronome restarted as if pleased with itself. Back at the pass, Dina brought her a slip from the front just to reset reality. 2 eggs over medium, no toast, coffee to go. Ray smiled and put the ticket where tickets live. The printer chirped behind it, apologetic, like it wanted to fit into the rhythm she knew. She tore the new strip free and didn't flip it yet, letting that thin, warm paper sit on her palm like a coin. She turned it over the way you turn over something you already know you won't like. Stro 37. Ray checked the wall clock because it felt like the adult thing to do. 318 stared back, honest as plates drying on a rack. The slips in her hand still swore, although 307 like they'd been printed in a different kitchen that hadn't moved on. She stacked the weird ones face up by the expo window so she'd stop touching them. Kenny pretended not to watch her do it. She pulled the seating chart from the side of the register just to prove seat 0 didn't live anywhere. Booths had 1s and 2s, the counter stools ran 1-8 and then gave up, and the patio column was taped over for winter. Dina leaned in, eyebrows up, and Ray showed her the strip without saying anything. Cute, Dina said, which is what you say when a thing is not cute. The kid in the corner watched the neon in the window like it was TV. The walk-in ticked its soft little metronome in the hall, steady as a person counting their own pulse. Ray took a bar towel, wrapped it around the latch, and pressed the switch with her thumb like she was soothing a stubborn button on a coat. The tick quit the instant she touched it, waited politely until she let go, and then started again as if she'd agreed to the rules. Condensation hung from the light ring inside and fell in slow commas. She wrote 320 on the temp clipboard because paper makes time real. Back on the line, she moved on purpose. Toast down, hash turn, plates wiped dry so they wouldn't squeal when they stacked. The radio in the break room slipped between songs and let a bit of late-night traffic report breathe through. Roads you'd never take at this hour, calmly closed. Kenny counted his drawer again, like counting would make the numbers like him. The friars exhaled and went back to still glass. The office monitor watched the back hall from camera 3, that honest angle that never made more room than there was. For one breath, the exit sign burned brighter, green washing the door face like a memory of summer. Then the brightness settled, as if it had been embarrassed. Ray leaned closer until her nose nearly met the dusty plexi. Her own face in the reflection looked like she needed sleep and a different job. The printer chirped in the quiet like it had raised its hand. She walked to it slower than she needed to, already knowing the weight of the strip. Etro 307, seat 0. This time under items, the dash had company. Door in thin black letters the system didn't use. She turned the slip over like a coin with 2 heads and pinned it under the first 2, a neat little flag for later. She gave herself a test because tests mean you still get a vote. She opened the walk-in, stepped inside, and stood just past the seal so the door wouldn't close on her jacket. Inside, the light was perfectly normal. No tick, no flicker, only the cool hum wrapping her cheeks. She touched the fixture's housing. It was cold and dry as a plate in winter air. When she stepped back out and eased the door shut, the tick started exactly where it had left off, like a song paused and unpaused. At the pass, Dina set down a plate and didn't quite let go. "You good?" she asked, quiet voice, big eyes. Ray nodded because the grill was still hot, the coffee was still coffee, and those were the kinds of truths you could stack. "Kenny says if it's haunted it better tip," Dina added, which helped exactly as much as jokes always help. The kid in the corner laughed into his sleeve like he'd heard it twice. The printer chirped again, gentler, almost sorry. 0307, seat 0. Under the word door, a second line had printed, smaller, like a thought tucked under another. Open. Ray didn't look up right away. She let the paper warm her palm before it cooled. She could feel the hall colder on her left, a thin thread of air pulling at her sleeve. She walked toward the white rectangle at the end of the corridor, hand out for the latch she knew as well as her own name. When she curled her fingers around it, the metal was colder than before, cold like a coin left under snow. She pressed the button with the towel and felt the door give the first honest inch. Then a tiny, unmistakable thing happened that didn't belong to hinges or seals. The latch tugged back. The latch tugged back a second time, not hard, just enough to let her know it had an opinion. Ray held it there, towel between her skin and the metal, and felt that small, elastic want from the other side. The fan inside kept its steady whir like it didn't care who won. The metronome tick paused, waited, and ticked again, as if to mark the attempt. She let the button go and the door returned to shut like a polite apology. "Kenny, you got a sec?" she called, keeping her voice in the diner register, low, flat, like talking to hot oil. He came back with the calculator still in his hand and a face that said he'd already decided this wasn't his favorite part of the job. She showed him the handle, the towel, the nothing else in the hall. "Feel sticky?" he said, and pressed it. It didn't stick for him, which is how these things go when you're trying to prove them. They went to the office monitor because video tells truths people won't. Camera 3 had the corridor framed in its narrow honesty, walk-in door, scuff line, exit signs, green wash. Kenny watched the live feed while Ray put her hand on the latch again, slow and obvious. On screen, the door eased a breath against her palm before she pushed, just a hair, enough to show a shadow where there hadn't been one. Kenny muttered, "Hinges?" like a prayer with no church. The printer chirped from the front like it wanted to join the meeting. Ray tore the strip free on her way past and didn't need to flip it to know the time. 0307, seat 0. Under the thin dash, a new word had printed when no such word lived in the system. Hold. She pinned it under the others, a little tombstone row growing warmer under the expo lamp. Kenny said nothing, which was loud. Inside the walk-in, everything obeyed labels because labels were the point. Milk, eggs, hotel pans wrapped tight, a tray of pies nobody wanted, cold air folding around her sleeves like clean water. She stood under the light long enough to feel the hum in her teeth. On the plastic lens, condensation had drawn 5 small arcs that could have been nothing, or knuckles thinking about a knock. The metronome tick did not exist in here. It waited outside like a line you crossed. Back in the hall, the tick resumed as if the room had been holding its place in the song. Dina showed up with a coffee pot gripped like a torch. "We good?" she asked, eyes on the door. "We're taking notes," Ray said, which was the closest truth. The kid at the corner booth watched the exit signs glow on the floor and pretended he wasn't. "Let's do it your way," Ray said, and put Dina at the latch while she went to the office. "Just hold it steady. Tell me if it pulls." Dina nodded like she was agreeing to a dare. On camera 3, Ray watched Dina's sleeve, her hand, the white rectangle of the door. The door pressed a fraction against her grip before she moved, shadow fattening along the edge. "It's asking," Dina said, not joking. Kenny came to the monitor and leaned in until his breath fogged the plexi. The register drawer out front thunked a soft 1/4 inch open like a cat testing a door, then settled. No one touched it. The radio in the break room lost a station and found the sea. The fryers stilled into hard quiet. Somewhere, the ticket printer searched for its cue. It found one. 0307, seat 0, under hold, the next line printed in smaller, lighter type as if the word had been smuggled through a thinner gate. "Please." Ray read it twice and didn't show it to Dina yet. She walked the corridor and put her palm flat to the walk-in door, the way you do to feel a sleeping animal breathe. The metal felt like snow that hadn't decided to melt. She pressed the button with the towel and let the first honest inch open, cold sighing past her wrist. The switch clicked from the wrong side, soft, decisive, as if a hand inside had reached up and completed the thought for her. The light did one tiny, tidy tick the way a metronome does when someone taps it to say, yes. Ray looked at the office monitor from the corner of her eye. On camera 3, the walk-in door had opened to a clean hand's width, and her hand wasn't on it. Kenny kept his eyes on the office monitor like it might file the report for him. On camera 3, the walk-in door held a clean hand's width open with no hand in sight, white skin of the door catching the exit signs green like a bruise. Ray stood in the real hallway with her palm off the latch to prove it. Dina hovered with the coffee pot like a lantern that had opinions. The fan's steady whir made everything else sound like it was pretending. "Let's count it," Ray said, because counting turns air into work. "1," she said, and the metronome tick answered neat. 2, and another tick, patient as learning to breathe through a straw. At 3, the door moved a polite 1/4 inch toward open, as if the number had been a password. Kenny swore under his breath like a person apologizing to math. The printer chirped from the pass, precise as a kitchen timer. Ray tore the strip on her way by. 0307, seat 0, under the stack of wrong words, waiting, door, open, hold, please, a new one, printed in the same thin, systemless font, stay. She pinned it under the lamp and watched the heat soften the curl. The tickets looked like they were learning to breathe together. She rolled a plastic bus tub to the hall because policy could wait behind physics. "We wedge, we test, we breathe," she said, speaking in the Register Kitchen's trust. Kenny started to say no wedges and then didn't, looking at the monitor like it had asked him for this exact favor. Dina set the coffee pot on the floor and crouched with both hands on the tub, like holding a door for a stranger you weren't ready to meet. Ray pressed the button and let the first honest inch arrive. Cold slid out clean, neither dramatic nor kind, and wrapped her sleeves. Inside, the light didn't tick. It shone like a thing that believed in itself. Shelf labels faced forward, dates neat, pans wrapped tight, a tray of pies nobody loved, waiting like a polite decision. The thermometer's needle held at a good number and pretended it always had. The wedge took the door's weight without complaint. Up front, the diner did its quiet version of noticing. The nurse paid with exact change and didn't stop walking. The bell over the door decided not to ring. The kid at the corner booth stood, sat, stood again, phone in hand like a lucky coin, eyes on the corridor. Dina muttered, "It's colder at my ankles," which is how true things sometimes show up. Kenny's calculator lay face down like it didn't want to see. On camera 3, the white rectangle of the door made a deeper rectangle in the screen, open beyond open, blacker than a cooler should be. For a breath, the exit green washed farther into that black than physics liked. Ray leaned closer to the dusty plexi until her reflection ghosted her eyes. In that ghost, a second smudge of a person stood beside her and then wasn't, like the monitor had tried an angle the building didn't have and gave it back. The printer chirped again, softer, like a throat trying not to ruin a quiet room. 0307, seat 0. Understay, 2 small words stacked like someone writing under a door. Count 10. Ray looked at the metronome switch and at Dina's hands on the tub. "We count," she said, and Kenny nodded because numbers were the last fair thing in the building. They counted together, kitchen soft. 1, the tick agreed. 2, the fan kept its even hum. 3, the door leaned into the wedge a whisper more and stopped. At 9, the light inside made a single, thin tink like glass accepting a temperature. Ray felt the metal under her towel cry cold, like a coin you find in snow. 10, she said. And nothing obvious happened, which is a kind of happening. She took her hand off the latch, and the door did not close, as if the number had taught it manners. The cold breathed past her sleeves and didn't decide to stop. The office monitor showed the door a hair wider than her eyes trusted. The walk-in light stayed steady, not ticking at all, as if the counting had changed what it believed it was. The printer answered one more time, quick, almost cheerful. "So 307, seat 0. Under the little ladder of words, a final line burned in alone, sure of itself in a way that made Ray's jaw ache. "Now!" Ray looked at the last slip, "now," and decided the only fair test was the one she didn't want. "I'm going in," she said, voice in the kitchen register that keeps hot oil calm. Kenny's mouth opened to make a policy and closed on it. He nodded once. Dina put both palms back on the bus tub and squared her feet like she was holding a door for weather. The metronome tick rested between them, patient, as if it had been waiting for this sentence. She checked what mattered. Inside latch, glow-green safety paddle, no ice at the threshold, gasket clean. "If I say wedge, wedge," Ray told Dina, meeting her eyes. Kenny took the office doorway like a lifeguard stand, one hand already on the monitor's bezel. Ray wrapped the towel around the button out of habit and respect. Then she pressed and let the door open, the full, honest arc the hinge could remember. Cold folded around her sleeves, her breath turned quick and private. Inside, the light was a steady coin above her head, no tick, no stutter, only hum. Shelves made their clean aisles, labels forward, dates true, The pies nobody wanted waiting like quiet decisions. She stepped 2 paces past the seal so the door wouldn't argue with her jacket. Outside, Dina slid the tub into place and took her hands away like she didn't want to teach the door new tricks. "Counting!" Ray called, because numbers make a bridge. 1. The fan answered with its even churn. 2. Stainless offered back a small, honest echo. 3. She touched the plastic lens. It was dry and cold, not building anything. Her name made no shape in her breath. She set the clipboard on the top shelf because future Ray would want to see the handwriting. The thermometer's needle stayed glued to good. A bottle nudged another bottle and gave a polite glass note, the sound a kitchen makes when it's pleased. On the door jamb, the little plunger switch sat down and behaved. She could feel the cold crossing her cuffs like snow deciding it could stay. 5, Kenny said from the monitor, voice trying to be even. 6. Ray looked toward the seam where the door met the frame and saw nothing dramatic, which is what you want to see. 7. The wedge thumped once, a tiny adjustment as the door leaned. 8. In the office screen, the white rectangle cut deeper into its own shadow, greener at the edges from the exit sign's wash. 9, Dina said, breath showing in a ribbon that shouldn't have made it this far from the fryer. 10. Ray lifted the towel and closed her hand around the inside paddle so she'd know what part of reality she still owned. "Now," she said, to the room, and the slips and the numbers that had been arguing with her all hour. Outside in the hall, the metronome tick stopped, as if it had heard its cue. "Let it go!" Ray said, and Dina slid the tub back without scraping, the way you free a door you don't want to insult. The seal took the last inch with a soft, clean pull. The latch settled from the wrong side with the sound doors make when they are sure. The light above Ray stayed steady, a quiet coin. Her palm rested on the glow-green paddle and did not push. In the office, Kenny watched the live feed because he didn't have another job in this moment. Camera 3 showed the walk-in shut, clean and white, patient under the exit sign's wash. The timestamp kept its honest minute. 3:31 stared back like a responsible adult. He looked from the hallway to the screen twice and chose to believe both. On the pass, the printer cleared its little throat and reached for paper. 0307 seat 0. Under the ladder of words, a new line printed in a thinner, fainter hand, as if squeezed through the smallest gate. "Thank you." In the cooler, Ray breathed once and felt the hum knit itself through her chest like a stitch. The air shifted ahead of her, not colder, just closer, the way a crowd makes room. At the door seam, something pressed from the other side. No knock, just the tiniest patient wait, as if the walk-in had remembered a hand and wanted to hold it. Ray let the door settle all the way and stood with her palm resting on the glow-green paddle, not pushing, just owning it. The hum filled her chest like a stitch, steady as the fan's breath. Shelves sat in their good rows, labels forward, dates honest, pies polite and resigned. Her breath made a thin ribbon and then decided not to. She told the room her name because names make rooms behave. Outside, Kenny watched camera 3 like it might tell him how to be a manager. The white door looked truer than anything, exit green washing the edge in a soft bruise. The timestamp marched like a metronome. 3:32, 3:33, not 0307, not the printer's favorite hour. He put a finger on the bezel the way you put a hand on a dog's back to keep it from getting ideas. Dina stood by the wedge, palms light, ready to be a doorstop again. Ray checked her breadcrumbs in there because that's how you know yourself. Clipboard on the top shelf, her handwriting neat and present. 3:31 exactly where it should be. She touched the plastic lens above. It was dry and cold, honest metal behind honest plastic. A bottle nudged another bottle and they agreed about it without drama. The air in front of her shifted like a crowd, opening a path for no one. The printer at the pass cleared its throat and chirped once, quick as a wink. Dina brought it without reading, and Kenny didn't ask her to. 0307 seat 0. Under the soft thank you, a new word had forced itself through in a thinner line, as if the gate was smaller this time. Rest. Ray imagined a person's voice using that word and couldn't find a face for it. She tucked the slip in her apron like a warm coin. Inside, the light made a single, tidy tink the sound glass gives when it changes its mind. Condensation formed at the rim and drew 5 short arcs before letting go, clean as a practiced knock that decided against itself. Ray watched the beads slide down their agreed paths and vanish into the seam. The thermometer's needle didn't flinch. She listened for the tick that used to live outside and heard only the fan telling time. On the office monitor, the angle went wrong for 1 breath. The exit green reached too far into the rectangle, painting a strip of cold air that shouldn't take paint. For half a second, a smudge stood where Ray's shoulder would be if Ray were on the hall side, turned a degree away from the world. Kenny blinked, and the geometry put itself back together like a tray, set right. "We're good," he told no one. Ray moved her hand a hair on the paddle and felt the slightest answering pressure from under her palm, like another hand had arrived first and was practicing the same not push. She kept her fingers loose so the message could pass through. The hum in the walls slipped a note lower and then found itself again. She thought of the slips of please and now and thank you, a ladder of manners printed by a register that didn't know words. "Okay," she said, not to agree, just to place a word where a word belonged. Dina, at the wedge, whispered, "Feels warmer," though the cold bit her ankles like before. Kenny didn't move his finger from the monitor's bezel. The kid at the corner booth stood and took 1 step toward the back before his own sense brought him back to the syrup. The bell over the front door decided not to ring again. The radio in the break room held a breath between ads and forgot to exhale. Ray lifted her free hand and set it flat on the door jamb instead of the paddle, wanting to feel the building's choice in the bones of the frame. The metal was coin cold, snow under fingertips cold, certain. Without her moving, the inside paddle softened a fraction under her other palm, a half click that belonged to a decision beginning. She didn't push. The wedge outside creaked once like wood, remembering weight. The printer chirped 1 last time and gave Kenny a strip he didn't bring to the door. 0307, seat 0. Under rest, a final single word arrived in the thinnest ink the machine had managed so far, a line you'd only see if you were already looking. Open. Ray stared at the glow-green paddle and felt it ease another hair, perfectly polite, exactly like a hand inviting hers to finish what it had started. Ray let the thin word sit in her head and kept her palm on the glow-green paddle. She didn't push. She matched the gentleness under her hand with the same. Cold breathed against her sleeves like a calm animal. The hum knitted through the racks and into her chest, steady and human-sized. She said, "Okay," the way you tell a room you've heard it. Outside, Dina hovered by the wedge with her hands light, as if too much muscle would wake something. Kenny watched camera 3 the way a person watches a dog they don't know yet. The exit green washed the white door in that soft bruise, geometry holding, because it needed to. The timestamp stayed honest, 3:33, 3:34, not the register's favourite hour. The fryer oil rested like black glass. Ray eased her fingers a hair and felt the paddle ease back, a courteous half-click that admitted agreement. The door didn't open more, it didn't shut. It simply breathed once under her palm, the way someone does before sleep. Condensation drew 5 small arcs on the plastic lens and let them go as tidy tears. The thermometer needle didn't bother to notice. The printer tried another throat clear at the pass. Dina brought the strip because leaving it was worse. Stow 307, seat 0. Below the thin open, a final word had made it through in ink so light it almost didn't exist. Rested. Kenny didn't read it out loud. Ray folded the slip once and put it with the others in her apron, like you keep a receipt from the only store open at this hour. She lifted her hand off the paddle, and nothing fought her. The wedge came away with a small plastic complaint, and the seal finished its work with a clean, wet kiss. Outside in the hall, the metronome tick did not return. The switch stayed polite and still. The fans even ran on like a person breathing in another room. Dina exhaled as if someone had given her permission. They watched the office monitor because that's how you believe a thing you've only felt. Camera 3 held the corridor in its narrow truth, white door, scuffed paint, the exit sign's patient wash. For one frame, a pale smear bloomed at face height on the door skin, the shape you get when someone listens too close. It thinned as they stared, until the paint was just paint again. Kenny adjusted the bezel like focus was a kind of prayer. Ray checked her breadcrumbs out of habit. Clipboard on the top shelf where she'd left it, handwriting neat and present. She set the pen at a diagonal on the counter, lamp a notch to the left, because that's what keeps the world from moving. The kid at the corner booth went back to his phone, pretending the corridor wasn't a story. Dina picked up the coffee pot and held it like a candle anyway. Back on the line, eggs hissed the way they always do, and plates made their small porcelain sentences. The radio in the break room remembered music and put it back between ads. Kenny counted his drawer like counting was still a door he could open. The printer stayed quiet, warm motor ticking down to comfortable. In the hall, the air over the tiles cooled and forgot itself. Ray glanced once more at the white door to confirm it was just a door. The exit green gave it that familiar bruise, and the seam held nothing. She wiped her hands on a bar towel and felt fryer heat come back into her fingers. She didn't look at the slips in her apron, but she knew where they were by weight. From the cooler, through the metal, the paddle gave one soft, polite click to no one. The warehouse at night felt bigger than the daytime version, like air added square footage when the bay doors were down. Sodium lights on the yard turned the world the colour of old pennies. Inside, fluorescence hummed in long, patient ribs. The security booth sat up on its little mezzanine with windows on 3 sides and a desk that knew every elbow. Malik Javed liked the height, close enough to hear a pallet jack rattle, far enough to make people look small and harmless. The monitors stacked in a 3x4 grid breathed their soft grey light into his face. He ran the same routine every shift because routines were scaffolding. Log in, check the badge system, clear last hour's motion flags, sip coffee that tasted like cardboard kindness. He scrolled the guard tour points with 2 fingers and listened for the barcode scanner chirp below as the last loader closed out. The forklift backup beeper in aisle 5 sounded like somebody laughing without meaning to. On the far wall, the building automation panel held its neat grid of greens like a quiet vote of confidence. Camera labels were taped under the screens in Sharpie, half faded from cleaning spray. 1 yard west, 2 yard dock, 3 aisle, 1, 3, 4 aisle 4 to 6, 5 aisle 7 to 9, 6 aisle 10, 12, 7 picker row, 8 break room, 9 QC table, 10 mez stairs, 11 office door, 12 yard east. 12 had a habit of sulking, signal drop after rain, a little snow static in winter. Malik kept meaning to schedule the lift to re-terminate the connector, meaning to count it until it didn't. Down on the floor, the night manager, Big Tony, a gentle liar about his diet, was closing cage locks with the soft clack of a person who'd done it too many times. A loader rolled a pallet of returns into the dim part of receiving and parked it like a sleeping dog. The air smelled like shrink wrap, wet cardboard, forklift gas, and a colder metal you feel more than smell. The dock curtains breathed when the building exhaled, letting a thin ribbon of night smoke in from the yard. Malik toggled through feeds, letting his eyes do the slow swim they'd learned. Look, name, release. Camera 6 watched aisle 1012 in that flat way cameras have. Long run of racking wire cages, the faint glitter of stretch film that never stopped thinking about light. Motion boxes from a false trip earlier still ghosted the frame like little promises. He cleared them with a key he could have hit in his sleep. The time burned neat in each corner, all of them honest, to the wall clock. He put an old tape of late-night radio low on the desk speaker because human voices keep a booth feeling like a room. Freight trains a mile off made long, patient lines through the dark. Now and then a hot unit on the roof stirred the air and the mezzanine window fogged a thin breath before clearing. The chair gave its nightly objection and then forgave him. The coffee cooled but got no worse. He liked testing reality in small, quiet ways. He set his pen at a diagonal across the blotter and nudged the desk lamp one notch left, a private breadcrumb trail. He counted the green LEDs on the recorder, even though the number never changed. He watched the top right monitor, 12 yard east, blink a single frame of no signal, then come back with its usual view. Chain link fence, a slice of the outer lot, steam from the storm drain. Somewhere out there, a security cart clicked by and didn't wave. At 0306, the forklift on aisle 5 gave one last backup chirp and went still, as if the building had agreed to be done. Tony's radio popped and told nobody that the break room microwave was out of order again. Malik wrote 0306 all clear in the log because logs eat little truths for breakfast. He stretched his hand and felt the bones pop in the quiet. A moth tested the booth glass and was politely refused. At 0307, the frame on the far top right, the one with 12 yard east taped under it, bloomed a wash of static like snow deciding whether to fall. It snapped clear before his eyes understood what they were looking at. The chain link and steam were gone. Camera 12 was still labelled yard east in Sharpie. But the picture showed something else. A long, cold interior aisle he knew by heart, numbered 12 on the end cap, seen from a height the building didn't have. The timestamp stared back, patient and exact. He tapped the keyboard to cycle inputs like the Matrix would scold him back to normal. Camera 12's label stayed yard east in the corner, stubborn as tape, but the picture was aisle 12 from a height the building didn't have. He toggled overlays off and on. The little timestamp winked and returned. Honest font, wrong world. He switched to quad view and back. The interior aisle held, long and cold and familiar. He ran the row 3, 4, 5 normal aisles from normal angles, 6 on aisle 10-12, flat, fine, a forklift asleep where it slept. Back to 12 and it showed the same aisle but from somewhere above the crossbeams, like a bird that could read inventory stickers. He wrote in the log because logs take the weight. 03-08 cam 12, shows interior, aisle 12, wrong angle. The pen felt heavier than it should. He checked the yard with his eyes because windows still count. Chain link where chain link lives, steam shouldering out of the drain, a ribbon of light along the curtain at door 6 where wind had a key. A security cart clicked past and paused under the mast, like it always did. The outside world had not been replaced. Only the square on the desk had learned a new trick. "Tony, you on?" he said into the radio, keeping his voice in booth calm. "Walk me to aisle 12, NCAP 12. Humour me." Tony groaned like the floor and said he was moving. On camera 6, the big guy ambled into frame, scanning for him out of habit, even though the camera couldn't see the booth. On camera 12, the aisle appeared from the impossible height, and a smaller Tony moved the same way, a step delayed, or just the way distance lies. He set his usual breadcrumbs anyway, pen at diagonal, lamp 1 notch left, because if the world planned to shift, it could do it around something. He pulled the recorder menu just to see if the machine would confess. Event, video loss cleared. Cam 12 stared back from 5 minutes ago like a weather report. He looked at the time in the top corner and the honest clock on the wall until they agreed. "Stop at the 12, Malik said, watching both frames. Tony did, hand on the upright, face turned up because he could feel the booth's attention without seeing it. On 6, Tony filled the lower third, forklift sleeping beyond, stretch wrap catching light. On 12, Tony was a tilt-shift version of himself under a rack upright, seen from high enough to make his shoulders look like furniture legs. The end cap sticker glowed 12 in both frames. "You got me?" Tony said on the radio, a little breath in it. "Copy," Malik said, too quick. The word came back to him through the speaker half a beat late, his own voice thin and second-hand. The air under the booth glass cooled a degree, and then forgot to. He told himself not to think about that. He thumbed the zoom on 12's software client even though it was a dumb digital crop. Wrap glittered, labels sharpened to little barcodes, a maintenance sticker on the upright read last year's date. Above Tony's head, the rafters resolved. No catwalk, no camera nest, nowhere for this view to hang from. The picture held steady like a thing that knew it was allowed. "Wave," he said, and Tony did, sheepish. The little Tony waved too, but the elbow looked wrong by a degree, as if the joint had remembered a different job. Malik told himself it was perspective, the lie-angle lenses tell. He looked at the recorder LEDs again to get his heart to take a seat. He flipped the audio monitor, not microphone, just the tiny hiss that tells you the line is alive. The booth radio gave a single carrier click, the kind that sounds like a throat deciding. On 6, Tony scratched his nose and stepped out of frame. On 12, Tony stepped after himself and then stopped where the camera wouldn't have line of sight if the building were real. The aisle beyond him looked deeper than it should. Malik glanced up at the wall clock to anchor his eyes. 3:12. He looked back at the monitor where 3:12 burned in the corners of every feed. In the top right square alone, the digits softened and thought about it. On camera 12, the timestamp slid back to 3:07 and held. He tapped the keyboard to cycle inputs like the Matrix would scold him back to normal. Camera 12's label stayed yard east in the corner, stubborn as tape, but the picture was aisle 12 from a height the building didn't have. He toggled overlays off and on. The little timestamp winked and returned. Honest font, wrong world. He switched to quad view and back. The interior aisle held, long and cold and familiar. He ran the row 3, 4, 5 normal aisles from normal angles, 6 on aisle 10-12, flat, fine, a forklift asleep where it slept. Back to 12 and it showed the same aisle but from somewhere above the crossbeams, like a bird that could read inventory stickers. He wrote in the log because logs take the weight. Euro 3-08 cam 12, shows interior, aisle 12, wrong angle. The pen felt heavier than it should. He checked the yard with his eyes because windows still count. Chain link where chain link lives, steam shouldering out of the drain, a ribbon of light along the curtain at door 6 where wind had a key. A security cart clicked past and paused under the mast like it always did. The outside world had not been replaced. Only the square on the desk had learned a new trick. "Tony, you on?" he said into the radio, keeping his voice in booth calm. "Walk me to aisle 12, NCAP 12. Humour me." Tony groaned like the floor and said he was moving. On camera 6, the big guy ambled into frame, scanning for him out of habit, even though the camera couldn't see the booth. On camera 12, the aisle appeared from the impossible height, and a smaller Tony moved the same way, a step delayed, or just the way distance lies. He set his usual breadcrumbs anyway, pen at diagonal, lamp 1 notch left, because if the world planned to shift, it could do it around something. He pulled the recorder menu just to see if the machine would confess. Event, video loss cleared. Cam 12 stared back from 5 minutes ago like a weather report. He looked at the time in the top corner and the honest clock on the wall until they agreed. "Stop at the 12, Malik said, watching both frames. Tony did, hand on the upright, face turned up because he could feel the booth's attention without seeing it. On 6, Tony filled the lower third, forklift sleeping beyond, stretch wrap catching light. On 12, Tony was a tilt-shift version of himself under a rack upright, seen from high enough to make his shoulders look like furniture legs. The end cap sticker glowed 12 in both frames. "You got me?" Tony said on the radio, a little breath in it. "Copy," Malik said, too quick. The word came back to him through the speaker half a beat late, his own voice thin and second-hand. The air under the booth glass cooled a degree, and then forgot to. He told himself not to think about that. He thumbed the zoom on 12's software client even though it was a dumb digital crop. Wrap glittered, labels sharpened to little barcodes, a maintenance sticker on the upright read last year's date. Above Tony's head, the rafters resolved, no catwalk, no camera nest, nowhere for this view to hang from. The picture held steady like a thing that knew it was allowed. "Wave," he said, and Tony did, sheepish. The little Tony waved too, but the elbow looked wrong by a degree, as if the joint had remembered a different job. Malik told himself it was perspective, the lie-angle lenses tell. He looked at the recorder LEDs again to get his heart to take a seat. He flipped the audio monitor, not microphone, just the tiny hiss that tells you the line is alive. The booth radio gave a single carrier click, the kind that sounds like a throat deciding. On 6, Tony scratched his nose and stepped out of frame. On 12, Tony stepped after himself and then stopped where the camera wouldn't have line of sight if the building were real. The aisle beyond him looked deeper than it should. Malik glanced up at the wall clock to anchor his eyes. 3:12. He looked back at the monitor where 3:12 burned in the corners of every feed. In the top right square alone, the digits softened and thought about it. On camera 12, the timestamp slid back to 3:07 and held. He checked the building panel because panels don't lie unless told to. Dock doors closed, cage, locks, secure. Motion aisle, 12, cleared. The neat green squares looked like a line of well-behaved teeth. He scrolled the last hour of events and found nothing braver than a forklift key-off and a microwave fault. The part of his mind that liked cause and effect wrote those down anyway. "Walk to the far cross on 12, he told Tony, voice booth flat. On camera 6, Tony's boots clicked past the sleeping lift, shoulders like furniture. On 12, the same boots moved through a colder aisle that felt wider than the building could afford, seen from near the rafters. The end cap sticker 12 glowed in both frames like an oath. Malik rolled his chair forward until it had no more forward to give. He pushed a soft reboot to cam 12 from the recorder, just the network tap, not a full power cycle. The square went grey for half a beat, video loss, and snapped back to the impossible aisle with the same patient timestamp and the same wrong altitude. Overlays on, overlays off. The little data bar nodded and returned to its post. The label still said Yard East, stubborn as tape. The picture did not care what it was called. "Drop something at your feet," Malik said. Tony set a blue pen cap in the center of the aisle, then stepped out of frame. On 6, the cap sat where it should, a dot on concrete in regular perspective. On 12, the cap landed a clean shoe width to the left of where physics liked, shadow fattened like the light had learned a new angle. Malek blinked once, slow, like you do when you don't want to blink to count as an answer. From somewhere down Picker Row, a barcode scanner chirped a single happy tone, the small, bright sound of a job accepted. No one should be picking at 3 a.m., and the guns slept in their chargers. He checked the task queue on the dock PC. The screen yawned, no active waves in honest font. The event log threw in one extra line for free. User 0, scan accepted. He did not like the 0. He cracked the booth window 2 inches to give his ears a fair shot. Night air climbed in, penny cold, smelling like wet cardboard and shrink-wrap heat gone to sleep. Below, something with small, hard wheels rattled once, a pallet jack testing its handle, and then remembered it wasn't there. On 12, 2 bays down from Tony's pen cap, a pallet faced a new direction it hadn't faced on 6. Malik closed the window and felt the room get smaller around the monitors. He rolled digital zoom onto 12 until the pixels got tired. Stretch film glittered where it always glittered. Dust showed as stars in a place that should have been too clean for stars. The concrete wore 2 pale crescents like heel scuffs that didn't exist in 6's honest view. Up near the top of the frame, something soft occluded a sliver, a curve like a shoulder too close to a lens. The camera that wasn't there had breath. "Hold," he told Tony. "Copy," Tony said, and the word came back through the radio a half size thinner, as if it had squeezed through a smaller throat. Malik listened to the hiss after the syllable and heard the idea of a second hiss that didn't belong to any speaker he owned. On 12, the image breathed once, no pan, but an inch of angle gone soft and righted again. The aisle beyond Tony felt longer, as if a door had quietly been moved. He looked up at the wall clock because clocks are the adult in the room. 3:14. Every feed wore 3:14 like a badge, disciplined and square. In the top right alone, the digit softened, considered, and slid back to 3:07 without fuss. He reached for his pen out of habit and found it already lying at a clean diagonal across the blotter, exactly the breadcrumb he would have left. He hadn't. On camera 12, the frame tilted 2 clean degrees toward the mezzanine window, the way a head does when it realizes it's being watched. Malik let his breathing find the booth's slow rhythm and kept both views side by side, 6 flat and honest, 12 high and cold. "Cross to the fire line, then hold," he told Tony, because instructions make rooms behave. On 6, Tony's bulk moved past the sleeping lift, shoulders like furniture. On 12, the same steps landed a hair left of where physics liked, seen from rafters that did not exist. The timestamp in 12's corner softened, considered, and slid back to 0307 like a habit it refused to quit. He wanted a dumb test, so he gave the aisle a dumb coin toss. "Drop another marker," he said. Tony found a hex nut on a shelf lip and flicked it to center. On 6, it chimed and rolled to a stop where gravity told it to. On 12, it landed an inch to the left with a fatter shadow and then decided to stop as if a slightly different floor had voted. Malik wrote it down because paper keeps score. The building panel chimed with its innocent doorbell voice. Motion aisle. 12 cleared. He scrolled the event history and found a new, empty little boast. Badge, user 0, granted, Mez NA. There was no Mez NA, there was stairs, and there was nothing. He hovered over the device ID and got a tidy blank where a reader name should live. The lure of a fix-it email tugged at him and then let go. On the desk speaker, the radio's carrier hiss learned a shape and forgot it, just the back half of a word, the way buildings practice speaking. Stand, it might have been, or only air making up syllables. He said his name and the time into the log, because saying things out loud pins them down. The booth glass took his voice and gave back a thin version, half a beat late. He set the pen at a clean diagonal because breadcrumbs still worked, even if the world didn't. Down on camera 9, the QC table, something small whirred itself awake. The little label printer that slept beside the scale spit a sticker in a neat curl without a hand near it. Malik slid the quad onto 9 and watched the paper coil like a tail on stainless. "Grab that for me," he told Tony, eyes never leaving the feed. Tony ambled to QC like a man doing an extra errand to keep his heart slow. "Blank?" Malik asked, already guessing, already hating the guess. Tony pinched the edge and held it up to the camera like a kid with show and tell. The sticker wasn't blank. In that thin, perfect thermal black, it read UR07, where a timestamp would live, and beneath it, where they'd expect a bin location, LOC0. Tony said, "We don't have a 0, like a person trying to be funny to see if being funny helps." Malik pulled the outside world through his eyes to rinse the square clean, yard fence, steam shouldering out of the drain, the security cart making its lazy click under a mast. He closed the window, and the booth regained its small, quiet pressure. On 12, 2 bays past Tony, stretch film twitched on a corner like breath had passed there. The pixels at the top edge bloomed once, faint and round, as if a lens had fogged and cleared. There was no lens there. "Stand under the 12 again," he said, steady as oil. Tony did, heel on the paint, chin up at steel that did not host anything. On 12, the field of view eased wider a hair, no zoom slider moving, no pan motor to claim it. The angle felt like a person leaning back to see better. Malik's chair found the end of its little track and stayed. He checked his breadcrumbs because that was the religion left. Pen diagonal, lamp 1 notch left, recorder LEDs green and board. He watched the top right square for his own future. For half a second before his fingers reached the lamp, camera 12 showed his desk from above, the lamp already at that notch, the pen already lying the way he would set it. His hand came into his own frame a beat late, completing a motion the picture had finished first. The wall clock said 3:16 like an adult. Every feed wore 3:16 except the top right, where the digits softened and slipped back to 0307 with no interest in witnesses. Malek forced his fingers still, away from switches and knobs, and stared only at the light in his own booth. On camera 12, from a height the building didn't have, his desk lamp rotated a clean notch left all by itself. Malik decided he was done watching from the aquarium. He set the pen at a clean diagonal, nudged the lamp 1 notch left, and said the time and his name out loud for the recorder, breadcrumbs he could measure later. "Tony, trade me. Booth is yours. Call what you see on 12, he said, voice booth flat. He clipped the radio high on his shoulder, palmed the slim flashlight, and took the stairs down on quiet feet. The mez step grates sang their low tin song, vibrations running into the handrail and up his forearm. Air changed at floor level, shrink-wrap sweet, wet cardboard, a thread of cold from the dock curtains. The forklift sat asleep under aisle 10 like a resting animal. Above, the roof unit coughed once and remembered itself. He keyed the radio without lifting it. Crossing to 12. Aisle 12 made a canyon, uprights like patient ribs, wire deck catching any extra light and making it look organized. He touched the end cap sticker with a knuckle, like you greet a doorframe you always pass. The concrete wore honest scuffs he could name by wheel size. Somewhere to his left, a pallet jack handle settled with a shy rattle. He slowed his breathing until it matched the buildings. Tony's boots took the mez stairs with zero enthusiasm, then the booth door thumped soft. I got you on 6, Tony said into the radio, trying not to sound relieved to be near chairs. A beat. On 12 you're higher, man, like I'm looking down at your hat. Malik stood under the end cap number and looked up at steel that did not host anything. The angle of the aisle felt 1 degree wrong, like a picture hung by a tall person. He left himself small truths on the floor, blue pen cap in the seam line, hex nut dead center where a crosshatch met, lamp notch equivalent by habit only. Marker down, he said, and heard his voice come back through the speaker, a half-size thinner. Copy, Tony said, and then softer. 12 showed your hand before you dropped it. Malik let his fingers rest open at his thigh, like he'd already been caught. The building panel chimed in Tony's ear up there, polite as a doorbell. Badge event, Tony read, struggling to make sense of it. User 0, granted, aisle 12 overhead. There was no overhead. The radio's carrier hiss learned a shape and kept only the back half of it. Stand. The syllable you get when a word decides not to be born. Malik set his palm on the upright to feel the steel's certainty. Tell me if 12 moves, he said, eyes on the imaginary perch. It's leaning, like it's stretching its neck, Tony said, not joking. Malik lifted his flashlight and kept it off, a courtesy to a thing that hated light. Stretch film 2 bays down rippled once as if the room had taken a careful breath. Dust marked a slow diagonal above his head and did not fall. He stepped 1 pace deeper, heel on the center line, and the aisle ahead lengthened a fraction the way distance does in a dream. Hold there, Tony whispered, as if loudness could wake shelf steel. On 12, you're dead center. It just nodded. Malik didn't have a word for that. He turned his face up into the cold above the beamline anyway, like you meet a neighbor you can only hear through a wall. The label printer at QC purred on its own again and spit a tidy curl. Tony didn't leave the booth to fetch it. Read 0307 LOC0 stand, he said, after leaning into the camera for a better look. Malik set his boots square, toes on the crosshatch, and let his hands hang where a person with empty hands leaves them. The radio's hiss took a patient inhale and held it. Air shifted over his scalp, not wind, more the pressure of someone lowering their head near yours to see what you were seeing. The upright under his palm carried that shift like a slow chord. The flashlight in his fist cooled like a coin fresh out of snow. He said, I'm here, to the aisle and the monitor, and the small, polite lies machines tell at night. Above him, in a place the building didn't own, camera 12 bent lower until the idea of a lens would have been eye level. He stayed under the end cap number, with 1 palm on steel, letting the aisle breathe around him. Air shifted over his scalp like someone lowering their chin to see what he was seeing. In the booth, Tony murmured, On 12 it's eye level with you now, not joking. The top edge of the picture bloomed once like a lens taking a breath, then held. In 12's corner the digits softened and slid back to 307 and refused to leave. Malik Javed, aisle 12, crosshatch, he said, for the record, because names make rooms behave. His voice came back through the radio a half-size thinner, like it had squeezed through a smaller throat. He lifted the flashlight, but didn't click it. The metal cooled in his hand like a coin fresh from snow. On 12, the beam traced a faint wash along wire deck anyway, as if the light had been accepted from a place his thumb hadn't reached. He lowered the torch and watched the wash lower, a beat late. The QC label printer purred in the corner of 9 and spit a neat curl without help. Tony leaned toward the camera and read it with the patience of a man diffusing a joke. 0307 LOC0 stand by. The barcode scanner somewhere down Picker Row chirped a single, happy tone, like a job accepted. Malik rubbed his thumb across the flashlight's knurling to feel something he owned. Dust above him wrote a slow diagonal and didn't fall. Drop a marker, he told himself, needing the dumb fairness of gravity. He flicked a hex nut to the seam line and listened to it kiss concrete. On 6, it landed where it should and spun to a stop like a good coin. On 12, it arrived an inch left with a fatter shadow and decided to stop early. He wrote marker off by 1 in the back of his head and let the pen stay where he'd left it upstairs. "Tony, what's the booth doing?" he asked, eyes still up at steel that didn't host anything. "Lamp just went that notch you like, by itself," Tony said too evenly. "Your pen's already diagonal on 12 before your hand gets to it on 10. Malik pictured his own desk from a height the building didn't have and felt his shoulders want a round. The recorder LEDs stayed green and bored, which somehow made it worse. He put his forehead lightly to the upright the way you do with a doorframe you've known a long time. The steel offered back certainty and a quiet, patient chord. "Count with me," he said, because numbers turn air into work. 1. The aisle gave him its even hum. 2. Stretch film 2 bays down crinkled like breath passing under a sheet. 3. The picture on 12 widened a hair without a slider moving. 4. Tony said from the booth, a whisper anyway. 5. The carrier hiss learned a shape and kept only the back half of it. Stand thin as tracing paper. 6. The forklift under 10 gave one polite backup chirp without waking. 7. On 12, the timestamp thought about being honest and then settled back on 0307 like a habit. 8, Malik said, and didn't know who he was calming. 9, Tony breathed, and Malik felt air lean over his cap brim, not wind, more like somebody's careful look. 10, Malik said, letting the words sit in the racks. The top edge of 12 bloomed the way glass fogs and clears when someone exhales. The aisle in the impossible view dipped 1 small degree, the tilt a person makes when they decide to be at your height. The radio didn't hiss. It held a breath. He didn't click the flashlight, but light lifted anyway, just a thin wash that moved from above his hat brim to the wire deck, like a hand steadying a beam that wasn't turned on. On 6, nothing changed but the honest dark. On 12, his cap's shadow bent the way it would if a shoulder had arrived next to his and learned his posture. Tony said, very soft, "It's right beside you, man." Malik kept his palm on steel and let his other hand hang where an empty hand hangs. The QC printer purred again and offered a last neat curl Tony didn't read out loud. He stared through the plexi and said, like reporting weather, "It says, thank you." Malik didn't answer because language felt like a switch he wasn't sure he should touch. Above him, in a place the building didn't own, camera 12 leaned the last quiet inch until the idea of a lens would have been level with his eyes, and in the booth, the top right square, watched his hat brim tilt before he moved. Malik kept his palm on steel until the aisle's hum felt like his own breath. "I'm here," he said once more, because names and numbers make rooms behave. In the booth, Tony whispered, 12 is level with you, like reporting weather." The top edge of the picture bloomed and cleared the way glass does when someone exhales. The timestamp in that corner softened and settled back on 0307 like a habit that had outlived its reason. He stepped back, one heel square at a time, giving the aisle the same respect you give a sleeping animal. Stretch wrapped 2 bays down made 1 small crinkle, and then forgave itself. On 6, the world stayed flat and honest. On 12, the angle rode with him as if a camera were backing away from his face. The QC printer purred again and offered a tidy curl. Tony didn't read aloud. Malik didn't ask. "Switch," he said, and let the flashlight hang, unclicked, like a promise he hadn't made. Tony's boots took the mez stairs back down in the monitors. Malik walked the long way up, hand on the rail, listening for any change in the metal's story. The dock curtains breathed and let in a thread of night cold that smelled like wet cardboard and coins. Above, a unit coughed once and decided not to repeat itself. The building stayed polite. In the booth, the chair remembered him, and the desk lamp held its notch to the left he always sets. His pen lay already at a clean diagonal, a breadcrumb laid by a future that had worked ahead. The recorder LEDs glowed their calm green count, unchanged, bored, trustworthy. The yard beyond the glass was chain link and steam, and a security cart turning on time. He let his shoulders lower by a finger's width. Top right, the square labelled 12 Yard East showed the booth from a height the building didn't own. The picture watched the crown of his head as if it had climbed an invisible mast over his shoulder. When he lifted a hand toward the pen, the hand in the impossible view lifted first by half a beat, finishing the motion a quiet second before he did. He let his own hand stop and watched the other finish in patient miniature. The corner digits in that square held on 0307 with a calm that felt like a choice. He tested the world the way he knew how. He straightened the pen to parallel and righted the lamp, eyes on the monitor. In the top right square, the pen lay straight before he had touched it, the lamp centered by a hand that wasn't there. And then, after he finished, both objects eased themselves back to his diagonal and his notch as if the picture preferred his habits. The radio's carrier hiss learned a shape and kept the back half of a word, stand, thin as tracing paper. The building automation panel chimed a polite nonsense. Badge, user 0, granted, mez window. He cracked the booth window 2 inches to give the night a fair look. Cold climbed in with the smell of shrink wrap and penny metal, and the glass fogged a faint oval, not where his breath was. Outside, the yard did its small chores, steam, fence, a cart that clicked and turned under a mast. On camera 12, from that impossible height, the empty chair beside him depressed by a careful inch and held. The cushion breathed once and remembered its shape. Tony's voice came up the stairs as if it were choosing not to enter the room. "QC just printed," he said, not crossing the threshold. Malik didn't look at the monitor. He looked at the little label curling itself warm on stainless, on camera 9, 0307, LOC 0, thank you. Sat in thin, honest black, the system didn't use. He let the words be what they were and didn't ask who had typed them. He set the pen back to diagonal and nudged the lamp 1 notch left because that was the order he trusted. In the top right square, his own booth kept that order for him, a beat ahead, like a hand resting on the wheel, while he pretended to drive. The yard stayed yard and the chain link kept its patient lines. The digits in the corner of camera 12 didn't leave 0307, patient as a lifeguard's whistle in a pocket. Malik sat with the building and let it count him. A slow bloom of breath touched the inside of the booth glass at head height beside his and faded to nothing without leaving a mark. In the square, labelled 12 Yard East, the view from nowhere leaned a quiet degree, the way a person settles their head to share a screen. He didn't turn to meet it. He watched the monitor watch him and listened to the hum decide what it wanted to be. The top right picture held its calm, wrong time and all, and the chair beside him did not empty again. Some nights the buildings keep count for you. The hum settles, the clock behaves, and nothing asks your name. Other nights, the digits hold on a time that isn't yours, and the room politely waits to see if you'll notice. For everyone working through the small hours, if the counter ever pauses at 0307, let it pass like weather, and don't look up until it does. The hum fades, the counters behave, and the doors remember how to shut. The chair beside you is just a chair again. If any part of tonight held its breath for you, let it go here. If you're on a night shift, tell me the hour glowing on your clock and what machine's keeping you company. Share the quiet details you notice when the building thinks you're not looking. New stories like this every night. Zip the jacket. Kill the extra lights. If the digits ever stop at 0307, let it pass like weather and keep walking.